And I remember going to pick Billie up from a dance class because I drove, and I was like, hey, the song is on a blog. It's like got hundreds of streams. Like it was like every increment of it was crazy. I think it has like 2,000 streams, and that blew our mind. And really the rest is history. Suddenly we're like, okay, I guess we should make some more stuff.
Hey, it's Guy Raz here, and welcome to The Great Creators. This is the place where I have conversations with some of the most incredible artists, actors, and performers of our time. On the show today, Finneas. The Grammy and Oscar-winning producer is probably best known for his collaborations with his sister, Billie Eilish. In this conversation, Finneas breaks down how he and Billie work together. He'll also tell the story about their viral hit Ocean Eyes that was uploaded to SoundCloud and made when Finneas was just 18 and Billie was 13. Plus, how he's found his own sound on his own albums, including his latest, for Cryin Out Loud. So without further delay, please enjoy this conversation with Finneas. I've seen you over the years break down your music, which is really interesting. I mean, really, really fascinating. Obviously, clearly you love what you do. You love the process of making music and of producing music. It's your profession, but it's your hobby. Is that fair to say?
Super. Yeah, I think that I don't know if you feel this way about any part of your job, but I feel like I get to do the thing that I would be the big fan of, if I were working some other job. I'd come home and I'd immerse myself in nerdy recording esoterica, and I'd be watching behind the scenes stuff, and that's just the person that I am. So it's a real privilege to get to, actually be doing this for a living. And I do think that the more that you can articulate what's important to you about what you do, the more important it is to the person sort of receiving it. So I always sort of try to remember that.
I've seen you talk about, with equal passion, about music and lyrics as you talk about like Logic and Pro Tools and plugins.
Yeah. Yeah, they're definitely not, I definitely don't favor one over the other. I think like the whole kind of conglomerate entity is the thing that's really exciting to me.
You mentioned, we've started our interview, but you mentioned this idea, and I love this idea that if you weren't doing what you were doing, right? Like, because you grew up in a middle-class house in LA, your parents were in the industry, but never made, sort of quote-unquote, made it.
No, they weren't rich or anything, no.
Right. And so, let's say today you were, I don't know, working at the Gap or something. Let's say, you would come home every night and you would do this. You would dream about this.
100%. Yeah. It was always like, I've talked to some people who relate to this. Like I've been so obsessed with making music as a kind of a job since I was like 12, 13. That was when they lowered the price of Logic Pro, the DAW, so I could suddenly afford it. And I would sit in my room and I'd sort of try to figure out how to record myself and produce and write songs. And again, like I was 13, so I wasn't very good at all. But I was already very convinced that was what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And, I was already stressed out, which is a little ridiculous, but is true nonetheless.
In another parallel universe, because I know sort of character types like you who I've worked with over the course of my career, you could have been like a brilliant field producer for radio, or like you would have made these soundscapes for podcasts. Like there's a certain kind of person who just connects with the technology.
100%. 100%. I think it's funny. I feel like I lucked into the most sort of celebrated versions of this. The jobs that you are just talking about are like kind of unsung heroes of podcasting and broadcasting. And let's talk film. Let's talk Foley artists and film, a field that I think most people don't even know exists at all, right?
Unless you're Hans Zimmer, right?
Yeah, they're like, there's...
Or Danny Elfman. Nobody knows
Well, and those are composers. I'm literally talking about like the guy who does the watermelon cracking open to simulate, a zombie's head getting blown off, right? Like, I think that that most people's perception is that the dragon actually breathed fire, and you're like, no, dude, there's not a dragon, and some person in a room saw that CGI of the dragon breathing fire and was like, I wonder what we should use to make that sound, and they tried this sound and this sound and this sound, and they blended them together. So it's like a real thing. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is just kind of like, I feel like I got lucky because the thing that I found success in doing is a popular mainstream version of this craft. But I'm still kind of like a fan of the craft at large. You know what I mean? Like that's, the kind of broad awareness is something that's like important to me and something I try to kind of instill in other people too.
It's not a given that, a producer is going to be known. I remember I interviewed David Guetta, of all people, I don't know, like 6-7 years ago.
Yeah.
And he really was the first DJ to kind of become the artist. He was the first one. It was, David Guetta featuring Rihanna rather than just Rihanna. And when he was spitting music in the 80s and 90s, he was just DJ. Even when he was producing, he was just a producer. But I think that even now, I mean, when he produces other people's work, or when you produce other people's work, clearly you love the craft of doing that. I mean, you love the process of it.
I love the process of it, and it's and counter to what I've sort of said about being celebrated, my real goal as a collaborator for other artists is that I am not noticeable, Hopefully I'm noticeable in the quality. Hopefully I'm noticeable in the fact that you like it, right? You hear somebody's song and you're like, this is cool. But I fantasize about, and a couple times I have had this come true, and it's been exciting. Obviously, like my work with Billie is very known. I happen to be her blood brother. There was a documentary made about her and our family. And so there's a lot of awareness of my involvement in the process of Billie's music. So at this point in time, probably, if Billie went and made an album with another producer, people would think that it was me. Do you know what I mean? Like I'd have to make a big statement and be like, it wasn't me. That's how kind of aware people are of my involvement in that process. And a couple times I've worked with artists. I did this song where I did some production on a song by an artist called Girl in Red in 2021. And I ran into a friend somewhere, and he was like, dude, I just was listening to this song by Girl in Red called Serotonin, and I was like, who made this? I love it. And I checked the track listing, and you're one of the producers. And I was like, oh my God, that feels so good to be a quiet part of this process. Because again, my fear is that the thing I do is like maybe too recognizable or not versatile enough that you'd hear somebody's song and you go, did the guy that does Billie's music do this? And you'd check and you'd be like, that's what I thought. Like I really want to be a chameleon in the production space, because my heroes are like that. The people that have made many, many albums that I've loved are like that. The old school, down to old school. Brian Eno has made, this album by this great artist and this other album, and it's totally different. Butch Vig.
Right. I mean, he does Heroes, and he also does like U2 records. And so there's something about...
He does Coldplay. He does Fred again. He does all this. His tapestry is broad, and you don't have to be a fan of this person to be a fan of all of it. And I love that about him.
Even though there may not, it's not like the Phil Spector wall of sound, right? That's so distinctive. But even though Brian Eno, you may not know that it's a Brian Eno record. There's something special about the record, and then you discover, oh, okay, Brian Eno was involved in this record. Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's sort of your, like the thing that's like your North Star.
It's my wish list. Yeah. I think the same way that like maybe if you're an actor, and you're not like on the movie poster with your name on the movie poster, like maybe you appear, like we were watching Oppenheimer last summer, and like
what a movie, what a film.
Gary Oldman pops in, and you have no idea it's Gary Oldman for like 10 minutes. You're like, that's the president, and then you kind of squint your eyes. You're like, oh my God, is that Gary Oldman? Like to me, that's like, if I'm Gary Oldman, I'd be like so pumped about that. You know what I mean? I'd be like, they didn't even know.
Yeah. I mean, so much has been written about you, your family, obviously your relationship with your sister. We'll talk a little bit about that, but I want to go back to something you alluded to, which was this idea of getting joy and also fulfillment from kind of being in the background. And I think that it's connected to this idea of, some people have a hard time putting themselves out there because it's not about the concern about putting themselves out there, but it's about the concern of appearing maybe selfish or like, hey, look at me. But there's something, but oftentimes those people are more interested in being in service to other people, right? Like I was thinking about this kind of reading about you and listening to a lot of your music in that I think a lot of your career so far, and you're so young, but you've done so much, is about like helping to enable other people to do their best work. Like it seems to me that that's really where you get a lot of your energy from.
Definitely. I mean, I also am really the most inspired by it. I think that that's the other kind of more selfish component of this, right? Is that I go in the room with an amazingly talented artist and I'm mad inspired. I'm like, this is amazing. And it inspires me to do a better job and it inspires me to work harder. I learn stuff. I'm always learning stuff. I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day. I was like, there's this producer, Dylan Brady, who's one half of the musician duo 100 Gex. And Dylan Brady has been doing production for other artists, and he did some production on this album called What's Wrong with New York by The Dare. And I was talking to my buddy David yesterday. I was like, I think I want to just go sit with Dylan Brady and like just bug him, just ask him so many questions because he's doing stuff that is blowing me away right now. So yeah, I think, being of service to the sort of bigger thing is a fulfilling experience to me. I think sort of your point, your musings are very sort of astute and accurate in terms of like the music space. I think that on one hand, true high visibility fame is like is a real prison, and without a real fortune to back it up, it's really dangerous and it's really scary and limiting, and hopefully you're famous as a byproduct of your art doing really well, and your art sold a lot of copies or whatever, and you made millions of dollars in the process. And so you counterbalance the drag of like not being able to go to the grocery store, not being able to walk through an airport easily with the fact that you have all this money. But if you want to be famous as a kind of an abstract, like these internet kids, internet fame is the least monetizable in a lot of ways. You're part of a meme or a viral video, and suddenly it's like on the street you're very famous, but that nobody paid for that video, so it didn't make any money. That's a very dangerous, challenging experience. Like, I'm being honest, like it's hard to be famous without a kind of an infrastructure to back it up. So I think of it as like a real luxury that I'm 10 times less famous than Billie, if not, 50 times less famous than Billie. But it's like, it's a luxurious experience. Billie also started her musical journey, when she was like 13. So she has no sort of understanding. She doesn't miss being a 22-year-old and navigating a world anonymously. She never did it, and she also is an enigma and a very sort of like, she's really cut out for the whole thing. But like, yeah, I was 18 and 19 and 20 with nobody caring who I was at all. And, the fact that now once or twice a day, somebody stops me on the street and says, I love what you've done with Billie or whomever else. Like, that's a real honor and it's fine. But it's like, I am very happy to be the less famous component of the duo. It's very exciting.
You get to have one foot in normal, quote unquote, normal life.
That's right.
And then sort of another foot in that other world, which, listen, you've won 10 Grammys and 2 Academy Awards. Like, you interact with very famous people. You go to these places. Right. You appear on stage in front of lots of people. So there's that world that you both have to inhabit and do inhabit. And probably part of it is fun and interesting, but then it can also be stressful and tiring, and you kind of just want to be able to go to the grocery store or go to a restaurant or go, hang out at the park and walk your dog or something. Yeah,
it's all good fun. I mean, it's really like they're real privileges. Like I never thought we'd get to do any of this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I often joke, but it's very sincere that like I had a really specific dream when I was like 15, 16, 17. I had a dream that one day my band, and then, Billie and I felt this way. One day my band would maybe be big enough to open for a band playing a venue in LA called the Fonda, which is like a 1,200 person.
It's Henry Fonda Theater, right?
The Fonda Theater. But in the scheme of, that's not an arena, that's not the Staples Center. Like, the Fonda is like 1,200 people. And that was my dream because as a teenager, I would go see bands I loved play there. because I wasn't listening to music that was like the biggest, most popular music. But yeah, all of the stuff that's followed us around, accolades, Grammys, the fact that Billie gets to play these enormous venues, we've headlined festivals, like, oh my God, that was so far-fetched, that was not ever a thing that we thought was going to happen. So we really appreciate it. But it has all been kind of a surprise to us. I think the thing about being a sort of a collaborative part of a process is really that, like, and I see this happen really early on with artists, and I get it. I do get it. Like, people want credit for their work. People, if somebody worked on some piece of music, and like, let's say you're the writer producer that worked on a song with an artist, and everybody, is talking about how brilliant the artist is, and they don't know that you were involved. That feels, you have a feeling of like, they don't know that I worked really hard on this, and oh my God, what if because they don't know, they don't hire me for another job? You know what I mean? Like, I really get it. I have a lot of empathy. So I'm not trying to discredit that part of the thing, but I think, like, once I realized that people were very aware of my involvement in especially Billie's music, I was like, oh, I think I'm just not going to push it. Like, I think I'm going to just focus on the work and be like, hey, like, people seem to be pretty clued in, and I'm pretty lucky that they're clued in at all, So outside of that, I just kind of try to focus on, like, the craft.
You this has been talked about and documented, but both of you were kind of raised. I guess today it's not as oddball of a way because so many kids are homeschooled. It's just so much more common. And I do a children's science podcast that lots of parents listen to, use for their homeschooled kids.
If I were a little younger, I would have listened to it. You
would have listened to it, yeah. Oh, wow in the world. But you and your sister, you guys were homeschooled, and so you were a little bit of an oddball. I mean, right? There were kids who went to school, and probably they'd be like, "Wait, you don't go to school?"
I was partially an oddball. I was partially homeschooled because I was an oddball. I mean, I was explaining this to somebody recently because we were talking about some kid who was homeschooled, and a friend of mine who was not homeschooled was like, "Yeah, but they don't fit those stereotypes. Like, they're not weird." And I was like, for what it's worth, like, a lot of the kids I knew that were homeschooled that were socially atypical or neurodivergent or, whatever you want to label them, they were homeschooled because they were bullied mercilessly in that school.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I have to be real. Like, that was a big driving factor in a lot of the kids who were kind of unusual and misfits and whatever. It was, they'd tried it. They went to school and kids were like, "You're different. I don't like you. I'm going to call you names." So I think, like, in many ways I was homeschooled. I was kind of homeschooled on a kind of a pragmatic way by my parents. They were both actors, which meant they were out of work actors. We lived in Highland Park in Los Angeles, which at the time was like the only neighborhood we could afford in LA. And the only school options are, we had friends who we knew who were in a different tax bracket, and their kids were in cool, weird charter schools and Waldorf and private schools. And those all seemed really sick, but my parents couldn't afford it. And so the school they could afford was like whatever was closest. And they were like, you know what? We're around all the time. We're so out of work that we have the time to be kind of, teachers, so to speak, to these kids. And I was a pretty odd child. I had a lot of separation anxiety and a lot of just sort of like generalized anxiety. And so it ended up being a really good fit for us. And our parents are really pretty learned. They had a pretty deep wealth of knowledge to teach us. Claudia, my partner, and I talk often about, like, would we know enough to homeschool kid? Like, that's kind of a joke in our friend group of like, could you homeschool a kid? Do you think you know enough? But they certainly did. Our parents did. And it was a great experience. And then also I had a lot of drive and I had a lot of passion. And I think that that's probably the area that I've seen homeschooling not be effective for kids is when I find a kid who has not connected with something or maybe they've connected with, like, the internet, just sort of broad. They just love Fortnite or whatever it is. But, like, if you have I think a thing that you can study that fulfills you, then it's a great, way to sort of dedicate your time. I mean, have wanted to be a songwriter and a musician from the time I was like 12. And so that was like a lot of hours per day I could spend sitting and writing songs, whether it was alone or with my buddies in my band, or, watching Berkeley clinics parsed out into YouTube series, or, rock docs, music docs. So it was like a lot of it's like a pre kind of college major when all my friends were in high school.
I mean, you were initially on a path to becoming an actor. You did like bit parts in TV and film and Glee and Modern Family, but obviously that wasn't the direction you chose. I'm curious, as you were like sort of entered your teenage years and really leaned into just songwriting and making music for fun, who were your influences? What were you listening to?
Yeah. The acting portion of it was funny. It was, I did some version of some like children's theater when I was like 11, and found that really exciting and fulfilling. And because our parents were both, had agents, I was like, Mom, I really want to, I want to go audition for your agent. And she was like, okay. So I remember like looking up a monologue online and then going into the agency and performing the monologue for the agent, who, again, it's like they don't pay you any money. They just send you on auditions. It's like an amount of work for them, and they get a percentage of your salary if you get a job. Anyway, so I really liked the performing component. The agent agreed to take me on. And then within like, I think about a year, maybe, I got that movie Bad Teacher, which was like this Cameron Diaz movie. And I was one of the kids in the classroom, and that was a really fun experience. And then I don't think I worked again for like 5 or 6 years. And then I did a couple episodes of Modern Family, and then I did the show Glee. But all kind of, it's from before the first minute of that, I was like, if a genie were before me and was like, what, you can have any career you want, I would have been like, I want to make music. Like it's always been the thing that's really taken a kind of a precedent over everything else internally. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the genesis in terms of like switching over to that. I would say the music I was listening to, I've been joking recently that like I kind of only was aware of bands. Like that was the stuff I was listening to, like My Chemical Romance and Green Day and Cage the Elephant and Kings of Leon. And my sort of awareness from a kind of a sonic place was like drums and bass and guitar and vocals. And I would like listen to some, whether it was like a pop artist or something else, and I'd hear like a bunch of synths or a bunch of like cool like electronic drums that weren't like a drummer at a drum kit, samples. And I was like, this is crazy. What is this? So it's a real kind of like blind spot for me. Through high school, I was playing in bands, and I was just like listening to bands incessantly. I mean, System of a Down, Thrice was a friend of mine's favorite band, so I got all into Thrice. Foo Fighters, Nirvana, Muse. We thought Muse was really cool. This is a little bit like showing our hand. Like we were like, Muse is the future. They're doing stuff no one's doing, because they were playing like crazy, digital guitars.
Apparently, the entire Twilight series was written listening to Muse. So there's something to be said there.
That's sick. Yeah,
that's a story I've heard. She wrote the entire thing listening to Muse. So there you go. I know that by the time you were in high school, or around sort of 15, 16, you kind of started to develop a reputation for hey, that kid knows how to produce music. Like he knows how to make, he knows how to record it. And tell me a little bit about what that actually meant. I mean, you had a laptop and, GarageBand and...
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so Logic Pro they'd slashed the price. Logic Pro had dropped from like $800 to $200, and I suddenly could afford it because I had some money from my acting jobs. Then I looked up what is an audio interface, which is like the thing you plug the mic into that you plug into the computer.
Yep.
And then I bought a mic called a AT2020, which is like the
Audio Technica
Audio Technica mic.
Sure.
It's like $80, and I was off. I was recording.
And you were singing into that mic, and
I was singing into it.
And you were also recording music into that mic.
Playing guitar and clapping and whatever.
In your bedroom.
In my bedroom.
Well, how were the acoustics in your bedroom?
Well, the acoustics were I would later come to find they were quite good. It was a small room, and it had all my stuff in it. It had a bed and bookshelves and whatever, so it sounded pretty good.
That's all you need. Yeah, absorbing the sound. Yeah,
it sounded so much better than like when I moved out of my parents' house at 21 into an empty house and had an empty studio, and it sounded horrible. I was like, oh my God, this was so much better in my childhood bedroom. Okay, so I had all this gear and I knew how to use it barely. I was like not good. And I was singing in this choir as a teen, which Billy and I both sang in the LA Children's Chorus. Mm-hmm. And I had this friend, Frank Dana, and Frank was like a seemingly, I didn't go to his school, so whatever. He was a seemingly very popular kid at his school. He'd post on Instagram and he'd get hundreds of likes. It was mind-blowing. He had good taste. He liked good stuff. I remember the first time I met him, I was like, "Hi man, nice to meet you." And he was like, "Do you listen to The Offspring?" Like I remember like he would like cut right to the chase. Anyway, so we're 17 at this point, and I've been fighting for my life trying to record demos of my band and stuff like that. And Frank comes to me and he goes, "You produce, right?" And I was like, "A little." And he was like, "Great. I need you to make an album for me." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he was like, "Are you around this weekend? I can come over tomorrow." I was like, "Okay." And he comes over and he plays me some references. He played me some references by Black Bear, who's a like cool rapper, musician, former Warped Tour kid. And he plays me these references and he's like, "I want to make something like this." I think the first thing we did was actually a cover of Black Bear. He's like, we're gonna do this cover. And so I pulled up like a stock Logic preset synth and I played that. And then I pulled up like a stock Logic vocal preset for him to sing into. And God bless Frank. Frank gassed me up so hard. Frank was like, "This sounds unbelievable." He was like, "This sounds incredible." And like, it didn't. It sounded very bad. But it was fulfilling to him. And, he saw the vision and whatever. And he was like, "This is perfect." And he was like, "I'm uploading it right now." And he put it on SoundCloud and sent it to his friends. And his friends started streaming it. And that was like, exciting. And it sort of showed me like, wow, we just made this thing and we put it up an hour later. And he was like, "When are you free again?" And I was like, all the time. I'm homeschooled. And he came over several days later and we made another thing and we got better. Like, I don't know that anything we made ever was like particularly good, but it got, incrementally better every time we'd work. And, I had this person telling me I was talented. That was like the real...
That matters.
Motivator was like, I was mediocre. I could tell I was mediocre. And my friend was saying, "You've got this, man. Like, you're so good." And he was willing to, rap and sing and whatever. And so it was this really fulfilling, fun year. I think we made music together for about a year, and it fed directly into me going to Billy and saying, "Hey, we should do this. Like, you should sing on stuff and I'll produce it." And that, again, it then leads us to upload stuff straight to SoundCloud, right? It's like, I've been shown by my friend Frank that's what you do. You just put it straight on SoundCloud.
Obviously, Billy was in the choir with you, 5 years younger,
right.
So she's your baby sister.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly, she, at least in the family, or maybe even beyond that, was known for having, you had recognized that there was something special about her voice.
She had a really incredible voice, always. She really just had an amazing tone and amazing pitch. And it's funny now because I really think she's like one of the best singers ever now. And it's funny to like listen back to her early stuff and be like, "Wow, we thought you were one of the best singers 8 years ago." Amazing. But yeah, she'd always loved to sing. She'd always loved to perform. She was also doing like kids plays and stuff. And she also had other interests. She loved gymnastics. She was really passionate about dance. She was in a dance, like a kids dance company, JKDC, and dance was the thing she was really passionate about. I think if we hadn't, made music and had that take off, I'm assuming she would have probably spent her high school years in an actual high school. This was a little tangent to go on. Both of us threatened to go to actual school for high school because the public high schools in LA are pretty cool. Like Loxa is a cool performing arts high school.
Right.
There's also a school called VAPA downtown that we had friends go to that seemed cool to us. And both of us separately, when I was 12, I suddenly did that movie Bad Teacher, and then I was in this band. And so that was what prevented me from going to high school. And then Billie, same deal. Billie was like, I think I'm going to go to high school. And then suddenly we make this music and it starts to work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think she was really passionate about being a dancer and probably would have devoted a lot of time to that because it's so kind of far-fetched to imagine that at 13 you'd be like a recording artist.
Right.
You know what I mean?
When you guys, you write Ocean Eyes, you're 18.
Yeah.
I think she was 13 at the time, maybe 14, I can't remember. And you make that song and put it on SoundCloud, and just kind of take me back to that moment. Like, were you doing it just because you wanted to work with your sister because you liked her voice and you wanted to make music with her? Presumably that was the motivation. There was no way you could have known that would actually
oh my God. Yeah,
get you attention.
I loved the sound of her voice. I was really excited and passionate about being a producer, and I was begging the people around me to let me be a producer, right? Like, to me, a fundamental part of being a producer is an artist, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, who's the person I know the best that's willing to be a surrogate artist with me? My sister probably. And she's 13, and so she's not going to come in and look at me and be like, you don't know what you're doing, even though I didn't. She's going to be, down for whatever. I write Ocean Eyes. I play it with my band at a couple gigs or one gig. It sounds bad. I don't like how my voice sounds on it. I don't like how real drums and guitars sound on it. But I love the song. I feel really proud of the song. And I go home and I'm like, I think a girl should sing this song. Hey, Billie, do you want to sing this song? She was like, yeah. So I play it on guitar. She sings it. I think it sounds great. I ask her if I can record it. She says, yeah. She has a dance teacher who's like, we need a song for the recital. So if you guys finish it by X date, this can be the recital song. We're like, okay, cool. We do it in this kind of like alt, synthy, indie vibe. There's like very minimal drums, very minimal synths, a lot of vocal layers. That has a lot to do, candidly, with like what we were listening to at the time, which are artists like Lapsley and Sylvan Esso and Aurora. So kind of a style that was really influential to us.
Yeah.
And we finish recording this song. I go to New York to sleep on a couch and visit my high school girlfriend. She's going to college in New York. And my parents lived in New York and met in New York basically before they had kids. So I'm like doing that thing that you might do at like 18 where you're like calling your parents' friends from New York and being like, hey, I haven't seen you in 9 years. Can I sleep on your couch? And I have a very vivid memory of being at my dad's friend Alan Kennedy's apartment. I think it was like Alan and his wife and his son maybe. And he was like, what are you doing? That was like the big question. I'm college age. I had no interest in going to college. And so they're like, what's going on? And I was like, I have a very vivid memory of being like, I'm going to play you this song that I produced for my sister. And I played Ocean Eyes. And I remember even in that room of like people I didn't really know being like, this is good. Like that was the feeling that I had. I was like, this kind of slaps.
It does. And it's a beautiful song.
Yeah, we really lucked out. So I go home from New York. I was there for like 9 days. Go home from New York. I forget the exact day. It was like early November, like November 15th or something like that. And I was like, it's like a Wednesday night. And I was like, hey, should we upload it? I was like, let's upload it tonight. And so we uploaded it on like, I think a Wednesday night. I have a memory, I think, of like, I don't know what was going on that night, but it was pretty late. Like we uploaded at like 9 p.m. And probably I shared it to like my Facebook and my Instagram or something, both followed by like nobody.
Yeah.
Like very few people. Next day, my stupid band is going to do a radio interview at a college, like just whatever, any favor we could pull. We go do this this interview. I think it's in Orange County, so it's a long drive. The interview goes terribly. We sound terrible. I'm driving home from this interview feeling so bad. I'm like, this is like, maybe I should go to college. Like, this is stupid. I stop at a pizza place on my way home to check my email. And Danny Ruckeson, who at the time managed a producer that we had worked with, Eric Palmquist, and who I'd been sort of bugging for like a year and a half. But our band had no momentum at all. And so it was like he was just kind of doing us a favor by like responding to our email and giving us advice and whatever. Danny Ruckeson had emailed me and he was like, hey, what is this? What's Ocean Eyes? And I was like, why? And he was like, well, I saw you post about it and now it's on Hilly Dilly. And I was like, what's that? And he was like, it's a really buzzy blog. It's like a really, influential buzzy blog. They were like the first blog to post about like Lorde and the first blog to post about this. And this is all kind of a funny part of the process because, of course, this is like blogs like this. I didn't know what Hilly Dilly was, but like we had been trying to get a blog to post My Stupid Band for like 2 years. Like, you know what I mean? I was like, what? And he goes, yeah. He goes, this blog posted Ocean Eyes. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah. He goes, I didn't know you had a sister. Like, I remember you mentioning it maybe in passing, but this is so cool. How old is she? Because he knew I was only 18.
Yeah.
And I go, she's 13. And he was like, oh my God. He was like, I thought, maybe you guys were the same age or whatever. She doesn't sound 13. And the blog wasn't, New Music Friday on Spotify. It wasn't like instant huge streams, but it was buzzy. And Danny, our now manager, but at the time, but the guy I knew was like, he was like, you should turn the free download link off on SoundCloud. He was like, because people will download it and they'll re-upload it and they'll rip it and whatever. And I was like, oh, okay. And I remember like, I think going to pick Billie up from a dance class because I drove and I was like, hey, the song is on a blog and it's like got hundreds of streams. Like it was like every increment of it was crazy, It was like, I think it has like 2,000 streams and that blew our mind. And, like really like the rest is history. Like we suddenly were like, okay, I guess we should make some more stuff, and we start sitting and writing songs together and trying to record them. And the song didn't come out on like Spotify, I think for like many weeks. Like I think my memory is that it got like 1 million plays on SoundCloud like before it was like really on Spotify. That could be wrong. It might have been like 100,000.
Was it posted as a Billie Eilish song?
Oh yeah, it was totally posted as a Billie Eilish song, which again, like sort of in my quest to be a producer, right? I'm like, you're the artist Billie Eilish and I'm the producer behind the scenes. I was not sort of trying to be like front facing with that.
The thing, I mean, I'm curious about so many things, but the thing as a parent myself of two kids and 2 boys who are really close.
Nice. That's great.
I'm really inspired by the relationship between you and your sister hasn't just been incredibly creative and fruitful. I mean, 10 Grammy Awards and two Academy Awards. I mean, it's amazing. At age you're 27, to have done that by your age. I mean, a lifetime for most people wouldn't produce that. But also how you collaborated at such an early age. A 13-year-old to an 18-year-old is a big gap at that time. And
oh my God.
Oftentimes there's not a whole lot of overlap or a lot of interest or a lot of in common. What do you think it was? Was it your parents who cultivated? I mean, I know it was just the 2 of you, right? But was it your parents who cultivated that, or was there did you just connect? Was just the chemistry between you and your sister was just there?
We got along great. I would say that our parents have forced us to work exactly 0 times. They might have sometimes reminded Billy specifically of like a deadline, you know what I mean? Like you might remind your teenager of a deadline, of like, hey, they remember the tour is 2 months from now, so if you want to finish the thing, we always really loved hanging. And I was so driven, and she's very driven too. But I think especially the first album, the first EP, I was a real kind of like, let's do this, let's make this force. Here's the funny thing about Billie. Billie loves, maybe more than I do, loves to listen to the thing we make. So like, I might kind of like the process more typically. Like that's kind of the breakdown of like the day where we sit and write and record the song. I might be kind of in my zone, and Billie might be a little like rolling her eyes at like how long it's taking me to do the drum beat or something like that. Sometimes it's a tedious process, but I kind of fuck with it, and then we finish it, and then I have a bounce. I send her an audio file, and then that's where like the joy kind of begins for her often, is she loves to listen to the thing she just was a part of making. She's like, that's a real like scratches an itch for her. So I think that's kind of our symbiotic thing. And not to discredit her, I think as she's aged, she's gotten better and better and better at the creating part and more enthusiastic about it, to a point where like there are days where she's more enthusiastic than I am. But I think at 14, when I was 18, 19, for her it was like, this is tedious and my brother doesn't know what he's doing. But when we have an export and I get to listen to it, on my headphones, I'm really satisfied.
Obviously, Ocean Eyes struck a chord, and there was a lot of interest in that track, but you had gone from like producing your buddy Frank, in your bedroom, to now pretty soon after that getting a record deal, right? Getting a record deal that would be real. And I wonder whether
crazy.
Part of you was nervous. Were you thinking,
"Oh my God, so nervous"?
And was there pressure at all coming from any quarters to say, Finneas, you're really good, but really we should have professionals involved in this record because, this is big time now?
100% to both. I was so nervous. I had such imposter syndrome. I felt like I'd gotten really lucky and made a good thing. I did not think like I can make many good things.
Right. Lightning doesn't strike twice or whatever, right? We often we think that. Yeah.
Yes. It's 100%. The label was about to, put forward a financial advance and they have to get a return on their investment and whatever else. And also, one of the things that a label can do that's really powerful is, connect you with people, right? So Billie and I go in for meetings. Props to our managers, props to my mom for letting me be a part of these meetings, even though it's Billie and not me. And we'd sit there and we'd say, oh, we love Lana Del Rey. And the label would say, well, Emile Haney produced that Lana Del Rey album. Why don't you guys go hang with him, And why wouldn't they? If I were a label and a 13-year-old kid came in, I would do the same thing.
And her brother, who was 19.
And her brother, who was 19.
Right.
And two things went on. One is that Billie was underage, and so I was kind of her, like, chaperone guardian whenever she went to work with anybody. So I was kind of always in the room. I wasn't kind of always in the room. I was always in the room. And the other thing was that I had written Ocean Eyes. And so I think there was a kind of at least an acknowledgement on behalf of the label of like, well, he did write the song that we signed her off of. So let's have them both go in. And we did many, many, many sessions with people for, honestly, like 2 years. And I also, okay, Billie and I are going to go work with somebody on a Monday. And then on Tuesday, Billie is going to do a photo shoot for this tiny magazine that wants to do a photo shoot with her. I'm trying to be a producer. So my manager would be like, here's an unknown artist if you want to work with them. So I feel like I did like what felt like 4 or 5 sessions a week for like 2 years.
Working with other artists.
Working with random people.
And the idea behind that was to give you the confidence and experience to become better or to give you the confidence to be able, I don't know, like to...
I think just like living the dream, just like, all I wanted to do was be a kind of a producer, collaborator person, and now suddenly I've made one thing that people hear and want, right?
Yeah.
So some artist, however small or large, reaches out to my team and goes, hey, I love Ocean Eyes. Who made that? I want to work with that guy, even though in my opinion I wasn't qualified. I made the thing they liked. So I'd go in with them. Billie and I would be working with, people. I don't want to get too namey because we didn't end up putting any of it out, which is very typical, by the way. Like, we would go work with all these people, and then we'd come home and we'd write a song alone together, and that would be our favorite. And then we'd record that one, and then that kept happening until the label finally was like, all right, we get it. Just work with each other. That's fine. And by the way, I have been that guy for several artists. Like in the last 5 years, some new artist comes along, and I'm like, this kid is brilliant. And I work with her or him, and we make stuff that I think is cool, but then they go make stuff with their primary collaborator that's even better. And I, on the back of like the Billie thing, I'm like, I get it. Like, we did it, and it's totally fine that you're doing it. But it is a funny kind of like music industry thing that it's like, Billie and I, who are like entirely self-contained, and everything we've put out pretty much has just been the two of us. There's like hundreds of people from the first 2 years who are like, I worked with them. You know what I mean? Like, it's a funny part of the learning process.
With respect to that process, that learning process, right? You think back to when you're 17 and frank, and really a sort of a kind of an important time in your life because it allowed you to experiment and learn and try things and get better. Yeah. That's just 10 years ago. Now, 10 years on.
Crazy.
You have a lot of experience under your belt, and presumably you get better and better and better and will continue to get better. And I wonder how you think that process happens. I mean, does it become, sort of your ability to think more creatively and more radically and more, I don't know, just in ways that you weren't able to do even 2 years ago? How does that happen? Is it a conscious process? Are you pushing yourself to do things that make you uncomfortable, that to work with sounds and ideas that challenge you?
The short answer is yes. I mean, I think that I remember so clearly, obviously it wasn't that long ago, but I remember so clearly the feeling of making the first EP with Billie, the Don't Smile at Me EP in 2017. Yeah. I remember how underwater I felt making that. I just remember being like, I'm kind of coaching a friend through it right now. I work with this kid, Ricky, and he's making an artist album for the first time. And like making something for the first time, you're like...
Scary.
Well, you're like...
Scary.
You're like, maybe it'll turn out I can't. Maybe I can't ever make one. I've never made one. Maybe I can't. Yeah. So I remember that first EP just being like, I can't, this will never get done. I was like, I'd go work on it every day, but it felt slow. I was so hobbled by my own lack of knowledge, and when you don't know how to do something, you do it the hardest way. That's usually my feeling. It's like, take 3 hours to do something now that I could do in like 2 minutes. So I remember that feeling of just being like, how do I do this? And I felt that way a little bit less on Billie's debut album in 2018. And then I have to admit, on Billie's sophomore album during COVID, I was like, I know exactly how to do this. And I feel like I pushed myself way less hard because I was like, you do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, whatever.
Yeah.
And I have respect for that work. And there are things on that record that I think are good and I'm proud of. But when I listen to it as a judge, I think this was made by a person who wasn't pushing themselves the way that they were pushing themselves earlier. And so it's been a real quest of mine to try to take on projects that really require me to go out of my depth and to learn and to expand my knowledge.
This idea of being, scared and nervous, but also sort of how you push yourself and your boundaries, how you basically get better at what you do, right? Which is an abstract idea. We don't always know that. It just happens. You just do it and you get better. Yeah. But I wonder if there are things that, when you go into the studio, and we're going to talk about your own music in a moment, but let me make this analogy. I've interviewed 25,000 people in my career. I'm almost 50.
Oh my gosh.
I've interviewed presidents and prime ministers. I've interviewed, Taylor Swift to Finneas, right? And it doesn't matter who I interview. It doesn't matter how experienced I am. I get nervous every time, and I'm not nervous about the person I'm talking to. I'm nervous about fulfilling the desires and needs of my audience, that I know that they expect that I am going to put in my best effort and that I'm going to work really hard to make it worth their time to watch and listen. And I wonder whether you feel that kind of pressure when you go into the studio at all?
I mean, I should, I think that that's the mark of being invested and engaged, right? So, yeah, I really want to deliver. So I really relate to that feeling that you have. I think that, again, that's what draws me to projects that I haven't had as much experience in, is that kind of feeling of like, I'm going to come at this with not even no ego, but like negative ego. Like, I'm going to come in and just be like, how do I do this? How do I learn? So kind of hungry for it. No preconceptions. That's a really appealing place to be in to me. And oftentimes I find that that's when I'm going to do my best work. If I have a sort of a like right and wrong, I might be sort of caught up in that. And if I have no idea what's right and what's wrong, I'll just be sort of free and experimental. And I think that that's when I'm my bravest, actually.
When you're creating sounds and you're trying to help shape a song, whether it's for your sister or for any of the other people you've worked with, is there a way to know whether it's good? I mean, it's kind of a weird question, right? Like, I guess maybe if we knew that, if there's a formula, you would just tap in the coordinates and you'd have a hit. But I don't know. Do you have a way for you to gauge whether? Because you will hear something and you'll say, I love this. But it's not always clear whether other people will.
100%. I mean, I have decided to trust my taste, Yeah. I'm also I think one of the things that I'm actually the best at is compartmentalizing something I like from sort of like, can it be better? I have some friends who are amazingly talented, but sometimes they can't tell if something's great. And I'm like, no, this is great. This is great, man. And sometimes they think it's great and they can't tell that it can be better. And I feel like specifically those two things I'm pretty good at. I'm pretty good at knowing when something is good, and I'm pretty good at knowing if it can still be better. And, better, good, I certainly don't mean commercially successful, because that is like that's like the stock market. That is like a totally different thing. And it has a lot to do with kind of the world and the zeitgeist and the appetite of the, person, and when people get itchy and they want something new. So I don't pretend to sort of have a crystal ball on that. But in terms of quality of product, that's the thing I concern myself with. How do
you, I want to see if, I'm sure there's a connection between the sort of the creative work and the creative output and the growth that comes from producing other people's work.
Yeah.
And also making your own music, writing your own songs, singing them,
right,
and then producing it. It's got to be both a totally separate and different experience, but also a complementary one.
I really do feel like I learn from each of them. And obviously, you do have to kind of devote yourself to a project to really see it through and finish it. But I can point to many instances, especially like even really early on in Billie's career, where like I'd be working on Billie's songs, and then I'd have like one day with some other artist, and the other artist would require something of me that Billie wasn't requiring. The other artist would be like, I want to make a song like this, and they'd play me like some reference point that I'd never heard, and I'd have to kind of like figure out what went into that without ripping it off, obviously, but like make something that is evocative. And then I'd come in to Billie the next day, and I'd be like, I learned this like totally new ability yesterday. Like I have this new tool. And oftentimes it was like a 1-to-1. It was like that immediately was implemented in something I made with Billie. So, the most recent tangible example is like I did the score for this TV show that's about to come out called Disclaimer.
With Alfonso Cuarón.
Yeah,
I mean,
crazy.
It's going to be, I've seen the trailer.
The show is so good. I'm really very, in the long list of things I can't believe I got to be involved in. This is so cool. This is just another one.
You created the score.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And talk about a thing that required something of me that I'd never done. Alfonso and I have known and liked each other for years, but we've never worked together really. And he calls me, he goes, I want you to score this show. And I was like, okay, crazy. He calls me, this is years ago now. He's like, I'm going to do this show, and I want you to score it. And I go, okay. And he starts to send me like references, stuff he likes, and it's all classical. It's all string quartets and cello pieces and like Vivaldi. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, are you sure it's me? Are you sure I should get this job? And he was like, yeah, it's gonna be great. And so I had to set about like learning how to compose for orchestra, and specifically string quartet, because the references he was pulling were often string quartet, and there's a kind of an intimacy there. Like he was very clear that he didn't want the kind of cinematic feeling of a 70-piece orchestra. He was like, I want the interplay of a cello and a violin and a viola. Like I want that kind of sparseness. So I start learning how to do this. This is all about a year ago. No, a little I forget that it's now September. This is like last spring, summer. And at the same time, I'm making Billie's album. And so I'm killing myself every day to do all this string composition that I've never done. But I'm having a good time and it's fulfilling. It's just hard. And Billie and I are making her third album. And, you know, you kind of are always reinventing the wheel when you're making a third album. You want to go places you haven't been before, but not abandon things that you did well. Anyway, and we get this melody going on this song called The Greatest. It becomes this like bridge melody in this song, and we think it's a cool melody. And a lot of our references when we were talking about making this album, a lot of our references are albums like Sgt. Pepper, Viva La Vida, these albums that have these big overtures and these returning musical motifs. And meanwhile, every other day I'm doing string composition, and so I'm like, I'm gonna write a crazy string overture that ends the first song and ends the last song and plays in the middle. And that's a good example of like a thing I would not have known how to do if I weren't simultaneously scoring this TV show. So, you know, I think, again, without kind of like bleeding into each other, the skills that I learn are transferable in a way that's kind of a relief.
Well,
yeah.
So working on that record, Hit Me Hard and Soft, really, there were tools that you sort of, as you say, I love that idea of a tool. It's like another tool in my toolbox that you're kind of discovering in this other thing that you're doing that then becomes transferable to this thing.
And vice versa. I mean, you know, there are other pieces on the Disclaimer soundtrack that there are pieces with vocals, not Billie singing them, but there are pieces with vocals. There are pieces with tons of synths and bass. And it's like, those are all skills I know from working with Billie, right? It's like, if I had only ever done string composition and done Alfonso's show, and then he'd been like, all right, this piece should all be synths, I would have been like, oh no, I don't know how to do this. But instead I have years of doing that. So, you know, it all kind of like, it rounds you out. It makes you a better collaborator. So
tell me about your second studio album a little bit for Cryin Out Loud. Because by the time this is released, the album will be out. And it's terrific. And
thank you.
It's very, you know, it's hard to sort of classify it as, it's not a pure pop record.
Sure.
It's there's like her singer-songwriter record. There are elements of all of those things on that record, and it's interesting because you've talked about bands like, you know, Muse and Sylvan Esso, and then more obscure bands or ones that you went to go see. And I wonder where your sound comes. I mean, it probably comes from elements from all those places, but what do you? I mean, again, do you kind of take that same approach to your own music of like, I don't want this to be, oh, that's a Finneas record. I want this to be, oh, I like that record.
I mean, I think the short answer is yes. I made this album, again, in a, you know, my long and ridiculous quest to always be learning something and doing something different. This album was made with a handful of my friends who are producers and writers and often artists in their own right, all at the same time, all in one studio. We all kind of wrote everything basically live. And the recordings are predominantly live recordings. They're, you know, okay, all right, here we go, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'd play the song down, and then I'd take all the files and I'd go in and I'd do a ton of vocal harmonies and I'd add some synths, but the bass of everything, especially like the single for Cryin Out Loud or the single cleats, like that really is like 90% live, everybody playing.
Live to tape, one recording.
Yeah. I mean, that was a aspiration of mine. And again, like okay, the bridge, the drummer likes his bridge from this other take better. We'll fly it in. Like we weren't precious about it. We were not trying to win some award for making it hard for ourselves, but I liked the energy of it. And one of my sort of worries going into the process was, I don't know if this album's going to feel like it has an identity because there's so many of my homies working on it and we're just having fun. And honestly, like whether other people think it or not, like when I listen to it, I'm like, oh, this totally sounds like one of my records. Like if you listen to my first album and then this album, like it totally feels like an evolution. It doesn't feel like the same record again, but it really sounds, it's my kind of like songwriting style, I think, and sensibilities. So that's really fulfilling. But again, it was I think a big kind of epiphany. It was like the last album I made, like alone in a room, like a windowless, dark room. It happened. A small tangent is when I was making my first album in 2021, my studio, which I'm in right now, my studio flooded. A pipe burst in the ceiling and the whole studio was destroyed and had to be rebuilt for months. It was very awful. And I still had a deadline. And so I was like, well, I have to go somewhere. And so I rented this room in North Hollywood that was like a very warm, very windowless room. And I made that whole record there. And it was really lonely. It was like a drive alone to North Hollywood every day. And I'd work on the album for 8 hours, 9 hours. And I'd come home and I'd listen to it and I'd be like, I don't even know if I like this. Or I'd be like, this is great, and I can't share in the sort of glow of this with anybody. So when I went to make this record, I was like, the thing that's going to make this fun for me is if I am collaborative. And also, I just like know more and more talented people. So like to make it full circle, the drummer who played on this album is a drummer from a band called Bad Sons that was like my favorite band when I was 17. And like, what a luxury. Like that's so cool to be able to call that guy who was the drummer on this album I love and be like, hey, do you want to come play drums on my album? Like that's just really satisfying to me. Same deal, my two of my best friends, Ricky and David, who are artists and producers. I was like, hey, come play all over this record. That's going to be so fun. And it really just sort of like bled into this, three-dimensional feeling. I remember those days really fondly. And also like we're going to play a lot of shows over the next 12 months and I get to play the shows with the people I made the record with who are also really close friends of mine. So it was all just kind of like a really sort of satisfying experience. And again, I think what it did, which I think is I try to do more and more and more in my life, is like it takes away a feeling of like this better be successful. Because I don't have control over that, right? I have control over how it's made. I have control over whether I think it's good. I can work hard on it. But is this going to be a big number one album? Like, probably not. My last one certainly wasn't. Is it going to be well reviewed? I have no idea. But like, I know that I loved making this record. I know that I'm really proud of it. I know that I want to play these songs live. It's like it takes all these kind of like things and puts them back in my court of like, this was a really fun process.
Obviously, you perform and have performed many, many times with your sister in front of audiences, and you've performed yourself. But when the spotlight is on you, and it's you at the front of the stage,
right? What's
your experience like? How do you? I mean, you must enjoy it at a certain level. Is it disorienting? I mean, how do you? I mean, now you've done it enough, but I wonder. Is it something that you would want to make this sort of centerpiece of what you do?
It's way harder. I'm always reminded of that. It's a skill set that I do enjoy and I find it very fulfilling. And it's an itch that isn't scratched from, I've loved performing with Billie, but it's such a different thing, I mean, like that's really about like the musicianship for me. I'm up there like playing all the instruments, trying to crush the part, but like I look out at the audience and 99% of the eyes are on Billie. It's her show, right?
Yeah.
So it's like that kind of feeling you have when you're on a stage and people are looking at you and you have this connection is like, I don't feel that on stage with her. Sometimes I have that connection with her, like we feed off each other, but I don't have that connection with her audience because they're looking at her and she's out there killing it. So I'm just kind of trying to support her. So yeah, I mean, I have loved to perform and sort of be the kind of front man. You know, I did it as a high schooler, and I've played some gigs as a solo artist. I've done like 2 tours of the U.S., but never of the world.
Yeah.
And it's hard, and it's more challenging for me, and it's exciting and scary. I think, you know, like, again, not to keep harping on it, but it's like it's the scarier option, right? I really am familiar with being on the road with Billie and how that feels, and it's fun and satisfying, but this is the scarier, more unknown thing.
It's interesting because obviously you take so much pride in all the work that you've done with your sister and all that it's produced, which you should. Right. And it's amazing that you're actually siblings and collaborators and very close friends. But you mentioned that early on, you know, you were sort of her chaperone because she was 13, and that was important. You had to kind of be there to protect her in a sense. And now, of course, she's an independent adult, but has not had the same sort of experiences in life that you did because you didn't become famous, quote unquote famous, until you were 19, 20
100%
years old. It's still hard. It's still really hard to be so famous.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I wonder whether you, not just being her collaborator, producer, and her brother, but also a person in her life that sort of is there to reassure her or to help her because, at any moment, I mean, that can really take a toll, that kind of pressure.
Yeah, this will be the first of her tours where I'm not at every show. I want to be at as many as I can, and if I had a time machine, I'd do all of them. You know, it's just kind of a unavoidable, like, you know, I said to our booking agents, like, I want to do all these shows, and you're like, well, you know, Billie's on tour for she's doing like over 100 shows. You can't make every one of those shows and then do all these shows you want to do. And also, you know, she is an adult, and I think my read is that she's in a really good place, and she's, you know, the people that are opening for her tour are close friends of hers, and she's going to have close friends of her singing. And I'll be at, you know, as many of them as I can be, and I'll pop out and sing songs. But I think, you know, if she were saying to me going into this, even if she said to me today, like, hey, I need you to be on this tour with me, I need the support, I would do it. You know, like that's how I feel about it. I feel like I would understand that, and I would want to be there and do that. That would be the most important thing to me because we've done this all together. So it's really just kind of like trusting that she's in really good hands and that she's going to have a great time, and that I'll pop in and it'll be really fun. But again, like if she said to me, or if she does, you know, if she does 6 months of this and says, hey, I don't like this as much without you there. Come back and be there. I won't hesitate. So, you know, it's an ongoing learning experience and experiment. And, you know, I think we did our first shows when she was 15, I think, or 16. I think she was literally 15 when we did like her first show, which is crazy. Yeah. I mean, she's 22, and you're totally right. She is a different 22 than somebody who didn't grow up in the public eye at 22. But in some ways, you know, whatever might be sort of different, like in some ways she's like more equipped for it because she's been doing it for so much longer. Yes. She has her 10,000 hours. So, you know, every time I play shows with her, I really learn a lot from her about performing. So I look forward to continuing to do that. I also, on a private and selfish note, really am looking forward to watching her shows. Like I've never not been looking at the back of her head when we're on stage. And I hear that her show is amazing. I hear that she's really talented and she has amazing visuals and production. So I'm really excited to just be a spectator and a fan and a supporter of my sister.
You know, what about you? I mean, I think of myself, I'm almost 50, and I think of myself when I was 27,
Yeah.
And I had, I still have a lot of my future in front of me.
Yeah, of course.
I was 27 and I was a foreign correspondent and I was covering the Iraq War and doing all these crazy things. And, that was a world I lived.
Right.
But there were so many things that I dreamed of doing in my
Yeah.
life. And I mean, you have accomplished so much at such a young age, and yet you have so much time to live your life.
Yes.
I mean, you've scored a film, scored this film, the Cuarón film, and a series, and you've produced for other people, and you've made your own music, and obviously written with your sister and produced her records. Where do you sort of see, if you had a crystal ball and you're like, okay, in 20 years from now, is there a person, or is there like a Brian Eno type person where you're like, that's kind of the career I want to have? Or how do you think about your future?
I think that to have longevity in any field is satisfying and aspirational and exciting. I definitely hope to do that. I love the work. I'd love to keep doing it. I don't have sometimes you see like a child stars, it's like, I don't ever want to act again. You have like Frankie Muniz retiring at 19, whatever it is. Like, I really love the work. I definitely won't feel like a failure if I keep doing work I'm proud of and it's never as big as some of the stuff I've made is. You know what I mean? Like, that, again, is like, that feels like outside of my control and not why I did it in the first place. So I'd love to keep working. I think the things that I look forward to the most are firsts. Like, I've always wanted to have kids. I'm really looking forward to having kids, and being a parent who, devotes a lot of time to being a parent. I mean, my parents did that, and I have now several friends who are like in the industry and have, perfectly busy careers, and I still see them manage to be like really present parents, and that's really exciting and motivating to me. On the short term, like there's a sort of a handful of things that I've always loved that hopefully I'll get to partake in. I've always wanted to make a musical. I've always wanted to like act in some interesting projects as an adult. So there's a lot of kind of personal, ambition left, but I think the things that I'm like, when I see my whole life ahead of me, like I see kind of like horizons I haven't, crossed yet. I see like being a parent, and I'm pretty excited to get older. I know it's a little cliche to kind of like wish you were going to be 25 forever, but I don't know. I've really enjoyed the passage of time.
I hear you. I never loved being in my 20s or even in my 30s. I love being in my 40s. It's great.
How old were you when you had your first kid?
32.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that feels really appropriate.
And it's amazing. I mean, it overshadows, not overshadows, but it trumps any achievement.
Of course. That's
personal achievement.
A universal thing I hear. What about your 20s did you not enjoy?
I didn't. It's not that I didn't enjoy them, but I worked really hard, which is good. I mean, I grinded. I wanted to be a reporter. I wanted to cover the world. I wanted to be overseas, and I did that. I mean, I was in airports and living in airports for 7 years, covering conflicts around the world.
Wow.
And I loved that. But I didn't get a chance to sort of stop. I don't regret it. I wouldn't do it any differently.
Sure. Yeah.
But I wasn't healthy. I smoked cigarettes. I drank alcohol. Things that today I look back and I think, God, how did I do that? I mean, now I'm like, I exercise twice a day. But I wasn't happy. And because I did those things, I wasn't happy also.
Sure. Well, it's stressful.
To be happy requires a lot of work. You have to work really hard. You've got to be disciplined and do a lot of things. And when you're young, I think, and you're younger, it's important to grind. I think it's important to really grind and to work hard. But there are real benefits to getting older and wiser and just living more of your life and getting more perspective.
I think you and I seem to have similar attitudes about accomplishment. I think like if I know that an accomplishment that I care about is on the other side of working really hard and maybe sacrificing sleep or something to get there. Like I will do it, and I will find that challenging to do it, but I couldn't not do it and be as fulfilled, right?
Yeah.
You know, so especially the last, 10 years, there have been months and maybe years on end where I've been like so stressed out and working so many hours a day, but the result of it is a fulfilling experience. And then, you know, when there is an ebb, I feel kind of at peace with like how hard I know that I did work, you know. And
Yeah.
I feel like candidly, you know, I am better and better and better at kind of compartmentalizing, you know, having a work-life balance where I really devote myself X hours or X days, and then I have days where I luxuriate in kind of something very kind of plebeian, of like having a meal with my friends and going to a movie, and it's very casual. And
Yeah.
I sometimes see friends who are not yet as far into their career as I am, and you know, I'm always very supportive of them working really hard, especially if they're, you know, on the younger side, where I'm like, hey, do you want to, you know, again, maybe I'm off cycle, there's the album's done, and I'm like, hey, should we go on a 2-hour hike and then watch a movie? And I have a friend that's like, oh, like I have so much work to do. And I'm like, no, that's fine. Like, do it, you know, like go do it. Like, I know how it feels to have that sort of drive of like, oh my God, I have to finish this tonight.
Yep.
And I was literally doing that, like, you know, 2.5 months ago on my album. I was like killing myself over it. Like, I really have a lot of respect for, you know, people working hard. But I do agree with you that I think like the older I get, the more I've accomplished, the more I can actually kind of enjoy myself.
Yeah. Which is awesome and a great perspective. Finneas, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. A treat to talk to you.
Thanks for watching my conversation with Finneas. His new record, For Cryin' Out Loud, is now out. If you want to see more videos like this one, please subscribe to this channel. We post a new video every week. And of course, we are an audio podcast, so if you want to listen to the show, just search for The Great Creators wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Guy Raz, and this has been The Great Creators from Built It Productions. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you right back here next week.